Welcome to the session today on impact on decision and policy making from big data from space. And we are extremely pleased to have as our keynote speaker for this morning, Inge Jonckheere. She is a PhD in remote sensing at the University of Leuven in Belgium. She has been as a team leader for remote sensing at FAO, at the Forestry Division. She's there since 2009. She is one of the leaders of the UN RAD project in the United Nations and responsible for capacity development. In that capacity, she has worked with 65 countries in the world, which is really fantastic. She's also very much involved in the Global Forest Observations Initiative, which is a flagship of the Group on Earth Observations. And to cap it all, she's been an IPCC author on the latest assessment report. So it's, of course, with great pleasure that we welcome Inge here. Inge, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Isa, for inviting me. I hope this presentation will go on screen. I have it on my computer. Yeah, okay. So, good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending. It's not always easy after a town hall meeting, so very pleased you're here. Very pleased also to introduce a bit the work I'm doing. So, as said, I'm with FAO. We're a specialized agency of the UN. UN is a big monster, but FAO is a specialized agency. The main focus is to eradicate hunger, and I'll try to show how we do this in the next 20 minutes or so. So I'm in the forestry department, and as Gilberto nicely said, so I'm an IPCC author. I'm in the mitigation part because I'm working mainly in the reduction of emissions of deforestation and degradation, so the forestry department. But maybe I want to take a step back and see why we're all here and why we're doing and having all these nice talks and all these nice views on all this data infrastructure. So the main goal is the climate change. As said, I work in FAO, we want to eradicate hunger, but with the climate change, of course, that has a lot of implications on all fields. So just for ourselves to remind that we're not on track, but I think I'm preaching to the choir, we all know, but this is the 1.5 degree, you know, it comes from the IPCC. So the idea is really to measure and monitor and to also to have an impact. Because what we tend to forget too often, at least in our field, is that we try to monitor and measure, but if there's not a policy impact or an implementation with it, nothing is going to change. So just by knowing that we're not on track, we're not getting there, so we also have to act. So the background here is, as I said, the climate crisis. So monitoring and forecasting has never been more important than now. So I heard it also yesterday a lot. So there's a lot of data coming up because we really want to know how it is. But knowing is not enough. We really have to act. And so also yesterday in the keynotes, I heard a lot on the better data. And so I'll also come back to that. Because the key question is, do we take better decisions? Do countries take better decisions? Now do we have better and more data? So this is the crucial part. So as you all know, there's a lot of global data. To developed countries, maybe that's not so important. It's good to know the overall picture. But in developing countries, sometimes it's very important because there's no national data. So you take global data, who's then adapted to the national scale. So FAO, we are a capacity building organization as well. We work a lot with partners. We're not a research institute, so this is also why I'm very pleased to be here, to really embrace all the collaborations we have and also to look for new collaborations because we're not the ones developing, it's really you doing it, as I saw also yesterday. But we have a very strong link, as Gilberto was saying, with GFOI, so the Global Forest Observation Initiative, in which ISA is also a main partner. And we join forces to really see the work we're doing in developing countries. So we work with MRV, so it's monitoring, reporting, and verification. I think what I've seen mostly also yesterday was the monitoring, the measuring, so really what's out there. Then you have the reporting part, which was mentioned in a few talks, and the verification, so I'll go into that. It's all about data, but as said before, we know that there's never been more data than now, so it's even becoming a problem. How do we store it, how do we process it, and then how do we get it? The other problem is also that there's so much data that we also have different results. So then we come to options where who is right, who has the right data, what's the real outcome. And so here I will talk about what we do with it to mitigate, to also respond to land and forest disturbances. So as said, I'm in the forestry department. We work with the national resources, so in general we do land use, land cover monitoring, and try to help countries with this. So far it was mainly mitigation, but I think for people who are close to the climate cause, you know that we're not going to make it only with the mitigation, so we're not good in reducing. For people who follow it up from the Paris Agreement, I think we reduced 1%, so that's not where we're on track. We do have the Green Deal in Europe. We're trying, everybody's doing its best, but we're not doing good enough. So adaptation is the new next thing. As you've seen, there's all these hazards. I'm not going to mention them again because we're always having all these bad news, but it's still happening. So adaptation is now the main focus. There's an adaptation fund, which is not depleted yet, so there's really much more to be done. And this is also a stream, and I think a lot of you can really help also with this. I've seen a few presentations yesterday also with all the data, how it can be used on a local scale to better predict these hazards. So the National Forest Monitoring, for people who are far away from this, so some foresters still go into the field, measure the individual trees. That's still happening, especially in the developed countries, because they have a long history of doing so, and they really trust the data. If you do it yourself, it's more accurate. Of course, that conflicts a bit with the remote sensing world, in which we think that we can do it all from space. We can do a lot, and we can really reduce costs with all this human power if you go into the field. So this is something FAO has been doing for 15 years. And we're trying to really move on and do the digital innovation, especially in developing countries where there's not a history of the National Forest Inventory. So there, remote sensing is crucial. Also crucial because we're looking at not one point in time, so it's the monitoring. We really want to have a time series. And then, as you know, with remote sensing, we can get there. So this is why we have a whole team on the satellite land monitoring systems, and then linked to this, the greenhouse gases. So, because when we were starting all this, well, back in 2009, there was quite some commercial licensing still on. Countries were very dependent on private companies to do that work. And so that's why we started an FAO in 2011, the Open Forest. So it's basically an open source module suite, which was developed in collaboration with partners, because I said we're not a research institute, and it was an open source initiative in 2011. So ever since, we've been promoting the open source, because we really saw that in developing countries, these dependencies on commercial licenses was something that did not work, simply because there was no continuity, or there were no funds, or no political will to continue. And so there was a lot of data that was just made and ended up in a shelf without being used. So this is something we've been using since 2011, and it was really made because of the need in these developing countries. So we're very proud on figures. So there's now 35,000 users. As we all know, in open source, there's a whole community behind it. And so that's also really the strength, because we really see that the South-South cooperation has been increased. And also a lot of countries really use it because it can be tailored to their specific needs, also translated. And there's also everything offline mode. So that's also important, because still in a lot of countries, the internet is not stable enough. So 10 years working on this. Of course, what we try to do has to have an impact, has to have a use. We only work based on user requirements, so we don't come up with ideas and then we try to bring them somewhere. We really use them. So we saw that 90% of the countries use the open forests, used in the sense that when they report to the instances, for example, UNFCCC, we saw in the reports that they use the open forest. So for us, that's a big success, because it means what we do makes sense. And the technical assistance which goes with it, it was also quite high. So here, without going into detail, you see just a whole list of countries. So as you can see, Brazil was the first in 2014 to come up with this forest reference level, as they call it, which then could allow also to get climate finance. So basically, the trigger to use this data was really to come up with reliable data which donors could trust, and which eventually would open also the access to climate finance. So there's a lot of differences between all the data, the good data, global, national, or local, which is made and then eventually used in reporting, because it's with the reporting you can see the impact of it. And this is something which sometimes we do see with academia is still lacking. So how does a scientist can really add and help when it can really be implemented in the country? So I won't go into detail of the whole landscape of these carbon finance because it's very complex and I don't think it's really the key of this. But just for you to know that countries can have access to this climate finance. So the first is on result-based payments. So for that, remember when I told about MRV, so you need to show that you have reliable data. And then a donor, if they have enough trust, they can give access to the climate finance. So the biggest is a Green Climate Fund, which you might know. And then the FCPF also from the World Bank was a big one. Then you do have the compliance markets and the voluntary carbon markets. So as you can imagine, a developing country who has very little data, they have to make decisions on which scheme they want to adhere to, and then also it comes with different standards. And this is what I wanted to just mention here. So basically, it's not about just the data they have. If they want to adhere to specific carbon finance mechanism, they have to have specificities on what they present. So for example, R3s, VCF, FCPF, and GCF, so they're all different schemes. They have different activities that they allow to be reported on. And for that, they also come with methodologies. So in that sense, the freedom of just to come up with data, to just bring a map, just to have statistics, it's not there. It depends really on where they want to have the finance. So without going to all the simple detail, but if you can see on the last line, the activity data, which is the area you mostly can do with satellite data, it has very specific requirements depending on which access to finance they really want. So as you can see, for some of them, they really ask the sample-based approach. So it means that you have to follow a statistical approach for really reporting on that data. So it really limits a country what they want to do and how they want to do it. So this is why sometimes in academia there's very nice global products. It's not that they can simply be adapted or used. So they're very useful in a global context, but in a national context, it cannot just be adopted by a country. So if we then look, and for example, these are the list of all the UNFCCC. So you know the UN framework for climate change, in which countries developed and non-developed send their reports. You can see, for example, that the pixel count, so simply taking a picture, satellite image and counting the pixels is still a method which is used in 2023. So I've seen at least yesterday a lot of cutting edge science, very nice AI stuff, but as you can see, reality is different. Reality also for developed countries, as said before, some countries don't even believe that with remote sensing data, you can really come up with something more decent than measuring yourself. So just to show reality and then the science. So we should really try to bridge and see where these new techniques can really take a stand. So then one thing is the activity data. So you need to know the area which you measure, and that's mostly done with remote sensing. But then in order, in the greenhouse gas emissions, if you want to link these two, you need emission factors, they call it. So you need to know how much of the carbon is emitted when you, for example, cut down a forest or you have an activity. And so also here, you can see that National Forest Inventory is still something which is used. And then, of course, you have these IPCC default values, so you can couple these two. Now, here what I want to say is also that in the forest science, there has been so much effort in the satellite data to really make a better use of the area. But of course, if you want to do a greenhouse gas inventory and your emission factor is not adapted to your level of detail of your area, it's lost in a way, because you can be really precise on having the area, but then you have an IPCC default value because you don't have the specific emission factor for the species or for the area. It's a really complex matter, and then it shows that these two do not match. So this is also a reality we face. And so in that context also the discussion, better data, higher resolution every day, is that really needed, and does that really lead to better decisions? So, as I said, Gilberto was saying, so I work in a UN RED, so it's the UN answer to the, let's say, the RED mechanism, which was set up in the COPs, which actually is coming up. And so what we mainly see is that we really need a better integration of these field, airborne, and spaceborne. What we still see, and I think that's also the case here, there's different communities who don't speak the same languages, and we really need to bridge the gaps between all these different communities. So we really see that for the monitoring solutions and the policy implementation, it's still a gap. So for example, in the forestry department and in the forestry context, there's still ongoing let's say, discussion on what's degradation. Even there, for example, there's no clear definition. So it's very hard to also measure if there's not a consensus on what's a definition. So in that sense, we really have to go ahead and see how we can do this. So we need also research in new domains. So food security is a big one, raw materials, inland and coastal waters. Very often these domains are really in silos, while we see that one can be the driver of another. So luckily now agriculture and forestry are more matched and seen as one entity instead of competitors, because at the end we need to have food for the whole planet, but then we also need forest for our CO2. And then as said also before, so mitigation has been the main focus, because I think we believed in the cause. We thought we could reduce our emissions. Unfortunately, we cannot enough. So this is why adaptation is a very big new topic, and I would invite people also to work with us and on this, because I think it's more crucial than ever that we have really an insight and data on how these global mechanisms, global climate parts really have an influence also on the local scale. So a few applications we've been doing. So the only thing I want to say there, so as I mentioned it already on the open forest, I invite everybody of you who hasn't worked with it, so it's all open source. It can be freely used, it can be adapted, it can be tailored to all the needs. So without going all the details of these different ones, so it was built for everything that was done in forestry, so going from into the field to the final carbon measurements. In the beginning also online, and then there's also an offline mode, and linked with Collect Earth Online, so with Google Earth, but I'll come to that. So key principles is that it's FAO-led, not specifically proud on it. The only reason why we started this is because in our big frustration, because what we needed was simply not available. We heard yesterday about all these platforms and these infrastructures, so unfortunately that's even another one. But it's, as said before, it's not that we wanted to create something new, it's simply because it didn't fit our needs. And this is also maybe why I'm having this plea here, that everything that has to be done and everything that can be done, I think the user requirements is something that has been too often forgotten. And it's not that we don't want to promote other tools, other packages, but it's simply we want to keep it simple. And as I showed in the previous slides, sometimes in developing countries, it's not the cutting-edge science which brings them to access to new finances or to new tools. So, as I said before, the software development, we do have a whole team of software developers, but everything is mostly done in collaboration with academia. And then all the testing goes into the countries. So indeed, we have worked in 65 countries now, and then we can really see the impact and resilience there because of the user-friendliness. And so the implementation, as shown in these reports, especially of the UNFCCC, but now they use it also for all these other frameworks, it shows that it has some impact. So the platform I want to talk about is CPAL. So it's a cloud-based platform for accessing and processing data. But nothing special, I think, you can say in this crowd here. I've seen amazing data infrastructures yesterday in the talks already, and I'm sure you all have amazing parts. So what we really wanted to come up with is a super user-friendly, easy way of access for even non-remote sensing expert users. So, and as you can see also with all the logos, it's a big collaboration. So we started in 2013, almost from scratch, simply because at that time we were still going with hard disks to the countries and then trying to show how you could download images. That was not the way to go forward, and as we heard also yesterday, with all the huge data we have now, that wouldn't have worked. So basically now we do have a cloud-based system, which was also a mental difficult thing to do because lots of these developing countries did not trust to put data on a cloud. So it's a big game changer, and it really changed the way we work with these countries. So what is it and what does it do? So it's Google Earth Engine based, user-friendly, extremely user-friendly, because we really see that in order to have impact, it has to really go with the end users, even if they're experts. So you never can just put the tool out there. It also has to go hand in hand with capacity building. And then, well, we heard it also yesterday, so AWS is the one we use now. So we had also first Amazon as a cloud, but then depending on the licenses, at the end we're UN, so we're quite restricted to what we do with the different parts. But most importantly, it really customizes all tools and all modules as we go. So it's not that we have a standard set of tools, it's just by going and doing and helping these countries set up these reporting, we come up with new ideas based on the needs of the users. So it's multi-sensor. So basically, we heard also yesterday, so we have a lot of these platforms where you can have access to the different satellite data. So also here, multi-view, so it's designed that countries can really use the different data sets next to one to another. And then multi-temporal, but that's very standard, I would say, in this community. For some of the countries it was not, because they had never seen data from their own country and also over time. As said before, we need time series because, for example, for forest reference level, you need to have a baseline on which you show that then you do better. So in that sense, remote sensing has really changed the way for that. So very importantly, and talking to a lot of people also yesterday, it shows that some people are not aware, even academia. So given the work we do, I think our main donor always has been Norway. Norway has always been very close to the climate cause. And so at a certain point, Norway wanted to even launch their own satellites. So then eventually they come up with the idea that they could provide us with a full archive and daily estimates from planet data. And that's actually where we stand now. So there's a license agreement with FAO in which the planet data is freely distributed for the tropical forest countries, at least until 2030. And it's distributed via the CPAL platform. So anybody who wants to work with planet data, who needs planet data for their research, I invite you to go into the CPAL. You can use it there as long as it's non-profit. And so that's a very big game changer, especially in what I was saying before in the degradation part, because it's the high resolution data for the countries. So we really want to expand the use because we've seen the data is out there, but it's not that it's just used, but the same thing that happened with the Landsat archive when it was for free 2011. We didn't see immediately a boom of using it, but only when we helped people, when we helped governments, when we went to go in, when there's a help desk, people can really see the use and the needs and the purposes of this data. So multi-donor, of course, a lot of people saw the good part of it. So the last development is that last week Norway was so pleased with the work done in the forestry and the land use applications, and now they want to expand to all other sectors, going also, for example, vessel following, so oceanography, and even humanitarian and disease monitoring. So because basically the platform can be used for anything. For now it started in the forestry department, but of course it can be expanded. So it's about the autonomous land monitoring. So as said, FAO is an enabler. We help countries to come up with data. We don't generate the data ourselves. And we've seen that the local knowledge is really the better decision. So it's not us saying what they have to do, how they want to do it, but really enabling how they can bring up their own data. So talking about that planet data access, this is the slide for people who are interested. So it's called the International Climate and Forest Initiative. So everybody is free to use it. So it also comes with an amount of free processing time. And then, of course, if you need more, that can also be adapted because also Norway is paying for all the processing time. So we're very pleased with that module. So as said, everything we do with that platform, all the algorithms which go on, it's based on the needs. And something which always popped up and which goes back to what I showed earlier. If you have a report, you always have to come up with uncertainties because that's one of the key questions for donors to show that your estimates are really valid. And so we've seen that a lot of countries were struggling with this. So this is why we come up with a sample-based area estimation. As you remember, we need it for some of the standards. And so this is a new module which you can find on there. So it really shows in a very practical way how they can do it. And so it calculates based on it's Pontus Olofsson from Maryland who came up with these modules, and then it's extremely practical for managing expectations and allowing carbon finance. So also there the use of AI is done. So again, we used together with the algorithms of the academia. And so basically it's really shown that a lot of countries now more and more report on uncertainty, which is really key also for the reporting mode. So this is, for example, the interface for the CPAL, so you can find all the modules there, they're freely available. And the idea is really to combine all the data sources. So it's not only with the satellite data, which is already on there, you have the whole planet archive, but also countries can upload their own data and also their in situ data, so it can be merged. So Collect Earth, I won't go too much into detail, but this is a visual interpretation tool for countries who don't have anything, so not an existing map yet. That's a really nice tool to start. It's visual interpretation, so yeah, we got lots of the inspiration on the Brazilian system, and so it's linked to the planet data and also the Bing data. Also, for example, augmented visual interpretation, again, super user-friendly, so you don't have to be an expert to work with it. And then also we have the online versions, which makes it all a bit easier than only desktop. So this is, for example, the CAFI validation. So this is in Congo. So it allows you to really zoom in, to find validation plots, to link it to your national forest inventory plots, and to link in situ data to the remote sensing data. So then also forest disturbance is something come up. So I don't have time to talk about everything we do, but basically, as you can imagine, all possible activities in forest and land can be monitored based on the amazing algorithms you all make. And so as soon as we can collaborate, because it's an open source module, we're happy to put it on the CPAL. So this is, for example, one for the forest disturbance. So we have main collaboration with Maryland, with Boston, with Wageningen, so open to anything you came up with. And then also, as you know, the ecosystem restoration is a big thing now. So there's a UN decade for ecosystem restoration. A lot of countries have to report on this. So this is also why we started working on that. And this is a few slides I wanted to add, because I just wanted to show, I see also a lot of academics want to work on this, or they work on it, but they don't know how to integrate with the policy part. So each of these different frameworks, they work with indicators, and these indicators and methodologies are set in a full set. And most of them also have custodians, so it means that there's an agency or an institute who's responsible for it. So in order to be able or to influence or to have a say in this indicator and this monitoring, you need to be part of these working groups, or you need to be part of these decisions. So sometimes they say these two worlds don't connect, but we try to do connect. So for example, on the restoration monitoring, there's a task force, and it's made of all experts, can be very technical experts on how to monitor these different indicators. And based on these working groups, then eventually they really fine-tune the methodology, and you can really have a say there. So I would invite everybody who's interested in these things to really connect to this. So this is, for example, a headline indicator. So where does it come from? So how you have to measure. It's not that you can just do the best science. You need to follow a methodology. And then for the reporting, that goes together with it, because the custodian, which is the agency, really then helps these countries to report on it. So it's an invite. This is one example of the restoration monitoring. Of course, there's many more. Then you can see the methodology in these working groups, they are decided. So this is where you can really influence the different parts. Because I've seen also in other talks, yeah, we measure the SDGs, but how do you measure SDGs? You can only have a valid contribution if you're part of the custodian who's working on the methodology and really helps the reporting for the specific parts. So you can see there's so many frameworks, there's so many things countries have to do. Even developed countries found it very difficult, so you can imagine in developing countries. So what we really want to try to do is to show that with the same data, you can really report to all the different frameworks. Of course, sometimes you need extra data, but that it's not a plethora of all different data, which then individually report to different schemes, because then, of course, it's a mess. So to finalize, so what do we want and what do we want to know? So we really need support in mapping these changes. As brought up before, adaptation is really something we're looking at, and depending on the countries where you come from, that's also something which we really look into. We have new products and services. The role of private sector, I heard this also yesterday in a few talks, is not to be undervalued, because I think they really can speed up sometimes much quicker than the traditional governmental way. So I think it should go hand in hand, and it really goes hand in hand, that's at least for what we see. So this is a really big step forward. And again, so from the user requirements and the user needs, I think what we've seen too often is that there's a plethora of tools, and then they even come up to me and ask, can you use them and can you introduce them in countries? Well, we cannot. The only option to have is to really include these people, the requirements from the start. And it's not enough just to have a little meeting to see what you can do. I think this is really back in the past. So even developing countries, they really know what they want. They have a plan. They want to have tools which are not black box. They want to have a say. They want to see how it works. They want to really adhere to it themselves. So data ownership is sometimes something that I think was too little taken into consideration. And a lot of these very nice products can only be endorsed, for example, by doing a validation or calibration workshop with the local people, with the governments, so in order to adopt it. So all the policy frameworks, I went to this already. And so maybe I just leave it with the IPCC one. So we need to act now, but from what I saw yesterday, I think we're all doing this, so this is great. And thank you for your attention. So these are my email if you have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Inge. So we have time for a couple of questions. Any questions in the audience? No? So I have one.
There's a question.
Oh, please, Srijora.
Yeah, please feel free also to reach out, and if you have good algorithms, we're very pleased to put them on the platform. Please.
Thank you for most excellent and enlightening talk. So I represent the geoscience remote sensing community, in particular the standards that are necessary and need to be developed to support data, best data usage. So I was wondering if you have any comments on the initiative within the remote sensing community to establish standards for what's analysis ready. I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but I didn't see it mentioned here. I see you're bringing in a lot of data. What are the requirements on that data in order to be useful and trusted? And what role is FAO playing in the various efforts to standardize? And I did notice mention on your page the standards for the digital public goods, but they don't say anything about quality necessarily. It's more like ownership and things like that. So, and as a footnote, I know FAO is participating in one of the standards that we are helping develop, and that is for protocols for establishing soil spectroscopy, which would help, of course, in one of your stated objectives to be able to remotely sense soil properties in order to track. So any comments about standards is what I'm fishing for here.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. So yes, as said before, UN and FAO is a huge organization. So the SOL part, that's not the part where I work on, but I know they work on standards. Very specifically on the remote sensing data, so there's also a geospatial unit who's working on the ISO standards, also for the LCMS, so for the legends. And so that's a very big part, and it's a mandate because FAO works with member organizations, as you know. So we have 195 members, and so we're mandated to do stuff if specific member states ask us. And so that whole thing of the legend standardization really comes from the member states. So maybe the other thing I can say there is, as I said before, so we only enable countries to generate data. So the remote sensing, it's quite scattered. So there's, depending again on the needs, if countries want to use remote sensing data, we help them to do so. But so we don't put our own standards on which data should be there. So I think the only thing that FAO does is help countries to adhere to the standards which they want to eventually have products to work with. So as I said in the presentation, for example, if they want to adhere to the R3 standard, they need to have sample-based statistics in a way, because even the mapping is not needed. We need statistics in most of the cases. And so we help them to access the different data available, specifically high resolution through the planet if they want to, and then to come up with the reports we don't do ourselves. So I think FAO is an enabler to really adhere to existing data, and then the reporting and that part and living up to the standards, it's for the countries themselves. So that's my take on that.
Okay, a final question. Anyone in the audience? If not, my question was to you, Inge. Given that FAO is very much concerned on openness, aren't you afraid that you're getting a dependency on Google Earth Engine for SIPO?
Yeah, I'm sure. But the thing is, well, you know, I think in 2013 we decided to go without Google, and we thought that was a great thing to do, that we could, let's say, do our own thing. But the whole thing with Google, so as you know, FAO has even an MOU with Google. And so for now, I do see that we're creating a dependency, but we do hope that Google will keep its promise for now, and then it's working great. You know, they have I think it's Google for Good, which is part of this, so it's a very political thing. So in that sense, for now, I think that's the only solution we had. Because as I said before, we are not a research institute, so I would have loved that anyone else would have come up with a data infrastructure, a tool which we could simply use like this. But given that it was not there, that's how we decided to create it ourselves.
Thank you, Inge.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.